The town sat quietly between dark hills and thick forest, a place most travelers passed without stopping. People there lived simple lives, waking early, sleeping early, and trusting only what they had known since childhood. Outsiders were rare, and strange things were not welcome. Yet for many years, fear had lived among them like an invisible neighbor. It was spoken about in low voices and never named too loudly. Everyone knew the story, even the children, though no one could say where it truly began. They said there was a fox woman in the mountains. Some claimed they had seen her red eyes shining between trees. Others said she walked like a shadow, half human and half animal, bringing bad luck wherever she stepped. When a goat went missing, or a field was found damaged, people blamed her. When someone fell sick without reason, they blamed her again. Over time, the story grew heavier, darker, and more dangerous than the truth ever was. Because fear grows faster than facts. The villagers avoided the northern paths near the old forest shrine. That place had been abandoned long ago, after a fire and a landslide made the road unsafe. No one went there anymore, not even hunters. Mothers warned their children that stepping too close would bring misfortune. Men spoke bravely in groups, but never alone. The foxwoman became the answer to every question they did not want to ask. Then one evening, a stranger arrived. He was not special in appearance. He wore worn clothes, carried a small bag, and walked with the tired steps of someone who had traveled far. He asked for water, then for a place to sleep. The innkeeper watched him carefully, as did everyone else. Outsiders always brought change, and change made people uneasy. The man noticed the silence, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of things left unsaid. When his eyes met those of the villagers, they looked away too quickly. At dinner, when he asked simple questions about the area, answers became short. When he asked about the forest, hands tightened around cups, and someone quickly changed the subject. Later that night, as rain tapped softly against the ince-wooden walls, the innkeeper finally spoke. "You should leave early," the man was told. "This is not a place for staying long." The man nodded but asked calmly, "Why?" The innkeeper hesitated. "Because some places carry trouble." That was when the foxwoman was mentioned for the first time. Not as a person, not even as a creature, just as a warning. The man listened carefully as the innkeeper shared what he believed. The story was broken, filled with guesses and fear. But the message was clear. Something lived in the mountains, and it was better not to look for it. Most people would have stopped there. Fear had done its job well, but the man did not feel fear. He felt something else: doubt. He had traveled enough to know that stories change as they pass from mouth to mouth. He had seen fear turn simple misunderstandings into lasting hatred. And he noticed something strange. No one spoke of seeing the foxwoman recently. Most stories were old, very old. Yet the fear felt fresh, as if kept alive on purpose. The next morning, the rain had washed the air clean. The man stepped outside and saw the mountains clearly for the first time. They were not dark or threatening in the sunlight. They looked quiet, almost lonely. He decided to walk. As he moved through the village, people watched him from doorways and windows. Someone warned him not to go north. Someone else shook their head. He thanked them politely and continued. The path grew narrow as he left the village behind. Grass replaced stone and trees slowly closed in. Birds were silent here, which made the forest feel older, deeper. He noticed signs along the way, old markers, broken charms tied to branches, symbols worn by time. They were meant to warn, not protect. Hours passed. His legs grew tired, but his mind stayed alert. He followed the path until it nearly disappeared, leading toward a broken structure ahead. The shrine. It stood crooked and forgotten, half covered by vines and moss. Stones lay scattered like memories no one wanted. The air felt heavy, not dangerous, but sad. This was not a place of anger. It was a place of neglect. The man moved slowly, respecting the silence. That was when he heard it. Not a growl. Not a scream. A weak sound, like someone breathing with effort. He stopped. His heart began to beat faster, not with fear, but concern. He followed the sound carefully until he reached the back of the shrine. There, hidden behind fallen beams and old seals, he saw her. She was real. But she was not what the stories described. She was smaller than he expected, thinner, with signs of injury and exhaustion. Fox-like features marked her face and ears, but her eyes held no threat. They were alert, tired, and deeply cautious. Chains of old charms and bindings surrounded her, glowing faintly with fading power. They were not fresh. They had been there for years. When she saw him, she froze. Her body tensed, ready for pain, not attack. The man did not move closer. He stayed where he was, letting her see his empty hands. He spoke softly, not using any commanding tone, just simple words meant to calm. "I won't hurt you." She did not answer. She only watched, breathing shallowly. In that moment, the man understood something important. This was not a monster hiding from justice. This was someone hiding from cruelty. Someone left behind and forgotten, trapped not just by bindings, but by fear built by others. The stories were wrong. Whatever had happened years ago, it was clear now that punishment had gone too far. No one deserved to be left like this, fading in silence, while others lived comfortably below. The man sat down slowly, keeping his distance. "I heard stories," he said, more to himself than her. "But stories don't breathe." Her ears twitched slightly. That was the only movement. He stayed there for a long time, not trying to break anything, not asking questions. Just being present. When he finally stood to leave, he spoke again. "I'll come back." She watched him go, confusion mixing with disbelief. As he walked away, the man felt the weight of what he had seen settle inside him. He now carried a truth that went against an entire town's belief, and he knew one thing clearly. Fear had created a prison, and someone had to open it. This was only the beginning. The next day, the man returned to the mountains before sunrise. The forest was quiet, wrapped in mist that clung to the trees and softened every sound. The path to the shrine was slippery with dew, but he walked carefully, determined to see the foxwoman again. He did not know what he would do when he reached her. He only knew he could not leave her trapped like that. Fear had kept others away, but curiosity and compassion had led him here. As he approached the shrine, he noticed small details he had missed the day before. The vines that had covered the entrance were thicker than they seemed. The stones that had fallen were stacked in strange patterns, as if someone had tried to rebuild the place slowly, but gave up. And there, behind the broken wall, he saw her again. She was awake this time, but she did not move. Her ears twitched at every sound, and her eyes scanned the surroundings, as though expecting a threat to appear at any moment. She had not spoken, nor had she moved toward him. She simply watched, and that was enough to make the man pause. He sat down a few feet away, careful not to make sudden movements. "I brought food," he said softly. "You don't have to come closer. I just want you to eat." Slowly, almost reluctantly, she looked at the small bundle he held. It contained bread, some dried meat, and fresh water he had carried from the village. Her nose twitched, and her ears lifted slightly. She was curious but cautious. The man smiled gently. "Take your time," he whispered. "I won't rush you." Hours passed like this. The sun climbed higher, warming the stones of the shrine, and still, the foxwoman did not move closer. But she ate the food he left, taking it in small bites. She did not make a sound, but he could see her shoulders relax a little. This small act of trust was a victory in itself. As the days went by, the man returned regularly. He brought food, water, and sometimes blankets when the nights were cold. He did not try to touch her or remove the bindings yet. He knew trust could not be forced. Every day, he spoke to her quietly, telling her about the village, the forest, and small stories from his travels. She listened in silence, but her ears and eyes followed him carefully. He also began to study the charms and bindings that held her. They were old and fragile, created long ago with fear and superstition. The man could see that they were not strong magic. They were tools of ignorance, made to keep someone misunderstood, imprisoned. Each day he gently tested them, learning which could be removed safely and which needed care. One evening, he sat near the shrine longer than usual. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the mountains. The foxwoman stepped closer than she ever had before, her movements slow and careful. She did not speak. She only watched him, and her eyes reflected a mixture of fear and hope. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I won't let anyone hurt you." For the first time, she lowered her head slightly. It was not a smile, but it was a sign that she could begin to believe in safety. The man felt a warmth in his chest, quiet joy that only comes from helping someone truly in need. The man realized that the foxwoman had been trapped, not just physically, but in a story everyone told about her. People had labeled her as dangerous, cruel, and untrustworthy without ever trying to understand her. Their fear had become a cage stronger than any chain. She had been judged for simply existing in a world that did not welcome difference. That night, as he walked back to the village, he thought about what he could do next. Removing the charms too soon could harm her, but leaving her like this would let fear win. He needed a plan that would keep her safe and allow her freedom slowly, step by step. The following days, he experimented with small gestures. He left food closer to the entrance of the shrine. He cleared the path of sharp stones. He even spoke to her while sitting on the floor, showing her he was no threat. Slowly, she began to move a little closer each day. Sometimes she would watch him from behind a stone wall. Other times, she would come halfway out, sniffing the air but not daring to touch him. One morning, a small accident happened. A branch snapped under her paw, and she jumped back in fear. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she froze completely. The man moved slowly, keeping his hands visible. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm. "Nothing will hurt you here." After a long pause, she stepped forward again, shaking slightly, but unharmed. That small act marked another turning point. She was beginning to trust that he would not betray her. She was beginning to learn that not all humans brought fear. The man also began leaving small gift stones, flowers, and even little carvings he made from wood. They were simple things, but they carried meaning. They told the foxwoman that he saw her as more than a story, more than a legend, more than a fear. She was real, alive, and worthy of care. Over time, he noticed more changes. Her posture grew less tense. Her ears stopped twitching constantly. She would sometimes follow him as he cleaned around the shrine, helping in her own careful way. The first time she allowed him to touch her gently on the shoulder, it was a quiet miracle. He did not rush her, only let her decide. He also began to understand her better. She had habits and routines, little quirks that made her unique. She liked to sit in sunlight patches in the morning. She was curious about moving water and would watch streams for hours. She responded to his voice, tilting her head as if she understood more than he could say. The man realized that fear had not made her cruel or dangerous. Fear had made others blind to her pain. The foxwoman had been cautious, yes, but she had not harmed anyone for years. She had only survived. And she had survived alone in a world that called her a monster. One evening, as the first snow of winter fell, the foxwoman moved closer than she ever had before. She did not speak, but she allowed him to remove one of the fragile charms from her wrist. It was a small step, but it symbolized trust. He handled the charm gently, explaining each movement so she would not be frightened. After the charm was removed, she did not run. She stayed, watching him with quiet eyes. It was the first time he saw her fully relaxed in months. He knew then that the story of fear and imprisonment was changing. The foxwoman could begin to heal not just in body, but in spirit. The man began planning the next step carefully. He wanted to remove all the bindings and bring her into freedom, but he knew it could not happen all at once. She needed to understand that freedom was safe, that she could choose her path without fear. Each day he practiced patience, and each day she responded with small signs of trust. The villagers continued to whisper about the foxwoman, but now the man had hope. He had seen the truth behind the fear, and he knew that people's stories were not always accurate. The foxwoman was not a monster. She was a survivor, a being who had endured neglect and misunderstanding. And slowly, with patience and care, she was beginning to trust a human again. The foxwoman still lived in the shadows of the shrine, The shadows were no longer prisons. They were spaces of healing, of quiet comfort. And the man knew that the hardest work was not just removing chains or charms. It was teaching her that humans could be kind, that safety could exist, and that trust could be earned again by the end of the season. The foxwoman was no longer completely afraid of the man. She stayed nearby without flinching. She even allowed him to help clean her space and brought small offerings to him in return: a shiny stone, a piece of fruit she had hidden away, or a small bundle of leaves. It was a language without words, a dialogue of trust and respect. The man realized that this was only the beginning. Freedom was more than removing charms, it was helping her believe she deserved it. He was ready to take the next step, knowing it would require patience, courage, and understanding. But for the first time, he believed it was possible. The foxwoman, once feared and misunderstood by everyone, was beginning to show her true self. And in doing so, she was teaching the man and, perhaps one day, the village what it truly meant to see beyond fear. The forest was still quiet, the snow still falling softly, but something had changed. The story of fear was no longer the only story. A new story had begun, one of trust, patience, and the quiet power of understanding another being. And so, the man prepared for the day he would finally set her free, not just from chains, but from a lifetime of fear. Winter had settled into the mountains. Snow lay thick on the ground, and the forest was quiet, except for the soft whisper of wind through the trees. The man walked carefully toward the shrine, his boots leaving prints that would vanish by morning. He carried a small bag with food, water, and blankets, but also something more important: a plan. He had spent weeks gaining the foxwoman's trust, and now he believed it was time to help her step fully into freedom. The shrine looked smaller in the cold light of morning. Its stones were frosted, the broken beams softened by snow, and the old charms still clung to the walls like reminders of the fear that had imprisoned her. Yet the man saw hope now, where before he had only seen despair. He had learned her routines, her habits, and her cautious ways. He knew that forcing anything could undo all the trust they had built. Patience had become his most powerful tool. When he arrived, the foxwoman was waiting, not hidden this time, but sitting quietly near the entrance. Her ears flicked at the sound of his approach, but she did not move away. She had come to trust him, little by little, and the change in her posture showed it. Her shoulders were no longer tight, and her eyes, though still wary, reflected a quiet curiosity. He knelt a few feet away from her, letting her see that he carried nothing threatening. "Good morning," he said softly. "I brought some food. And today, I want to help you, but only if you want it." She blinked at him, her head tilting slightly. She had not yet allowed him to touch her directly, but she did not retreat either. That alone was progress. He unpacked the food and set it nearby, letting her approach on her own. She sniffed carefully, then ate slowly, glancing at him between bites. After she had finished, the man studied the charms still around her wrists and ankles. Some had already loosened slightly, but others were stubborn. He did not reach for them immediately. Instead, he spoke quietly, explaining each step he would take. Words were not something she fully understood, but tone and intention mattered. He wanted her to feel safe, not controlled. "I will help you remove these," he said gently. "It won't hurt. I will be careful. And if you want, we can take it slow. You don't have to move unless you feel ready." Her ears twitched, and she lowered herself slightly, as if acknowledging him. Slowly, he approached, keeping his hands open and visible. He took the first charm from her wrist, a small piece of thread tied with faded symbols. She flinched slightly, but he paused, letting her calm herself. After a few minutes, she relaxed, and he continued carefully, one charm at a time. By midday, most of the bindings were removed. The foxwoman's movements grew freer. She tested her limbs carefully, stepping around the shrine with a new lightness. The man watched with quiet satisfaction. Freedom was not just physical. It was in the way she began to carry herself. The way her eyes brightened with curiosity rather than fear as the afternoon sun warmed the shrine. The man decided it was time for the next step. He spoke softly. "Would you like to leave this place today?" Just for a little while? The foxwoman hesitated. The shrine had been her prison for years, but it had also been her shelter. The world outside was unknown, full of humans who had feared her paths she did not know, and snow that could hide dangers. But she also sensed that this man, this stranger, was different. She had felt his patience, his kindness, and his respect. Slowly, she moved toward him, letting him guide her gently. Outside the shrine, the forest looked different. The snow reflected the sunlight, and the trees were lined with frost. She paused, sniffing the air, listening to the distant sounds of wildlife. Birds chirped softly, and a small deer grazed near the edge of the forest. She froze for a moment, instinct and caution taking over. But the man stayed calm, kneeling slightly, showing her that there was no threat. Step by step, she followed him through the snow. He let her choose the pace, sometimes slowing, sometimes stopping, to let her observe her surroundings. She was cautious, but curious. The forest had always been part of her life, yet now she could explore it without fear of punishment or judgment. After a while, they reached a small clearing with a stream. The water ran clear and fast, untouched by human hands. The foxwoman stepped closer to the edge, lowering herself to drink. Her reflection in the water showed a face less guarded, more alive. She glanced at the man, and for the first time, it seemed as if she recognized him as a friend, not a stranger. The man smiled. "You are safe," he said. "You can go anywhere, but you don't have to leave my side if you don't want to." She looked at him silently, then at the forest beyond the clearing. After a long pause, she stayed near him. It was not obedience. It was choice. She was learning that freedom could exist alongside trust. That she did not have to fear every human just because some had harmed her in the past. Over the next days, explored more of the forest together. He showed her hidden paths, small caves for shelter, and places where food was plentiful. She learned to move lightly over snow and ice, to watch for signs of danger, and to enjoy the warmth of sunlight on her fur. Each day brought a new small victory, her hesitation fading, replaced by cautious confidence. The man also began teaching her small tasks he thought she might find useful. They gathered firewood, built a small shelter near the shrine for cold nights, and learned to find edible plants. The foxwoman was quick to understand, observing carefully and trying her own way before asking for help. She began bringing him small gifts, things she found in the forest: a bright stone, sprig of pine, or a carefully cleaned feather. Each gift was her way of saying thank you. The man accepted them with gratitude. One evening, after a long day of walking and exploring, they returned to the clearing by the stream. The foxwoman sat quietly beside him, her body relaxed. She did not hide or flinch. She watched the water, listening to the soft murmur of the stream. For the first time in years, she seemed peaceful. The man realized how far they had come. Weeks ago, she had been trapped, chained, and alone, surrounded by fear. Now she was free, able to move, explore, and even trust someone again. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but also humility. He had not saved her with strength or force. He had saved her with patience, understanding, and respect. That night, they returned to the shrine, where the man had built a small fire and prepared a simple meal. The foxwoman approached the fire willingly, letting the warmth touch her fur. She did not sit on him or demand attention, but she stayed close. Watching him prepare food and listening quietly, he spoke softly as he worked. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "You have a choice now. You can stay, explore, or leave. No one will stop you. No one will hurt you if you don't let them. You are free." The foxwoman tilted her head, as if understanding more than the words themselves. Her eyes softened, and she let out a quiet sound, a soft, contented breath that was almost like a sigh. The man realized it was the first sound of peace she had made in years. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. She followed him willingly, explored the forest, and began to show playful behavior, small movements, careful pounces, and soft sounds that reminded him of a cat or fox at ease. She was no longer a figure of fear, but a living being learning to live again. One morning, The man returned to the shrine to find that she had begun to explore the village outskirts on her own. She stayed hidden, watching from a distance, but she had ventured further than ever before. He understood that she was learning to balance curiosity with caution. Freedom was not just leaving the shrine, it was feeling safe enough to face the world. By the end of the season, she was almost unrecognizable from the frightened, chained being he had first found. She moved with grace, confidence, and quiet joy. She trusted him, and more importantly, she had begun to trust herself. The man knew that their journey was not over. There would still be challenges, moments of fear, and days when the world felt dangerous. But he also knew that the foxwoman had discovered something far more important than freedom from chains. She had discovered freedom from fear, and in that discovery, both of them found something else, an unspoken bond, built not on power or ownership, but on patience, respect, and the quiet understanding that one life could help heal another. The story of the feared foxwoman was no longer just a story of fear. It was a story of hope, patience, and the first steps toward a life lived fully, safely, and freely. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing soft green grass and early wildflowers along the forest paths. The man returned to the shrine each morning carrying food, water, and sometimes small gifts he thought the foxwoman might like. She had grown more confident over the past months, moving easily through the forest and exploring areas she had never dared to approach before. Yet she still hesitated near the village, and he understood that trust needed time. Spring brought longer days, and with them, new opportunities. The man decided it was time to let her learn more about the human world, slowly and gently. He chose early mornings, when the village was quiet, and they could move without fear of crowds or sudden surprises. Together, they walked along the edge of the village, keeping two hidden paths. At first, she froze whenever a villager appeared, her ears twitching and her body ready to flee. But each time he stayed calm, showing her there was no threat. Slowly, she began to relax. One morning, a small child ran across the path, chasing a butterfly. The foxwoman froze, unsure what to do. The man whispered softly, "It's okay. She won't hurt you." He knelt down and watched carefully, letting her see that the child meant no harm. The foxwoman hesitated, then slowly crouched, mimicking his posture. The child noticed her too, stopping in surprise, but the man smiled and waved gently. The child waved back and continued running. The foxwoman's ears twitched, but she did not flee. This was progress. She was learning that not all humans were dangerous. The man also taught her small routines that humans use daily simple things like washing hands, observing the village's rhythms, and understanding the sounds and signals people made. She was a quick learner, watching closely and copying gently. She even learned to help him carry small bundles of wood or food without knocking them over. Her movements were careful but confident, and the man admired her focus and curiosity. As the weeks passed, she began showing playful behaviors that reminded him of animals he had cared for before. She would chase falling leaves, leap lightly over streams, or crouch and pounce at small shadows. He laughed quietly at these moments, feeling a deep joy in seeing her spirit awaken. He realized that these small, simple actions were not just play, they were signs of healing. Proof that fear was slowly leaving her mind. The foxwoman also began showing affection in her own way. She would sit near him during meals, watching quietly, sometimes brushing against his arm or shoulder without prompting. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. She was learning that companionship could be gentle, safe, and voluntary. The man never forced her attention. He only allowed her to decide. Each small step was a victory for both of them. One afternoon, the man introduced her to a small garden he had cleared near the shrine. He showed her how to plant seeds and tend to small plants. She was curious, touching the soil with her fingers, observing each plant closely and learning quickly how to water them properly. Over time, the garden grew into a small, vibrant space, full of herbs, vegetables, and flowers. The foxwoman took pride in it, often sitting nearby to watch the growth, her ears flicking at every sound in the forest. Through these daily activities, A routine formed. Mornings were spent exploring and learning about the village's edge. Afternoons were for tending the garden, walking through the forest, or sitting quietly together. Evenings were calm, often spent near a small fire, sharing warmth and silent companionship. These routines provided stability, showing her that freedom also meant safety, not chaos. One day, while exploring a path farther from the shrine, the foxwoman paused at the edge of a clearing. She sniffed the air and looked toward the village in the distance. Her body stiffened slightly, and the man noticed her hesitation. He knelt beside her and whispered, "You don't have to go there. You can stay with me, explore at your own pace. Nothing will force you to do anything you don't want." She stayed for a long moment, considering his words, before slowly sitting down. Then, surprisingly, she stepped a little closer to him, resting her head near his shoulder. It was the first time she had shown such closeness without fear. The man smiled quietly, careful not to move too quickly. Trust, he realized, was earned in moments like this. It's not demanded. As spring deepened, the foxwoman began to show curiosity about small human objects. She would inspect baskets, examine cloths, and watch him cook with fascination. He explained the purpose of each item, and she listened intently, tilting her head as if absorbing every detail. She asked questions in her own way, pointing, gesturing, sometimes using soft sounds that the man had begun to understand. This silent communication created a bond that words could not capture. One evening, after a long day in the forest, the foxwoman surprised the man. She approached him with something in her hands, a small bundle of wildflowers, carefully collected and tied with a piece of grass. She placed it near him and stepped back, watching for his reaction. The man picked up the bundle, smiling warmly. "Thank you," he said. "It's beautiful." This moment was significant. It showed that she was not just learning human ways, but also forming her own ways of expressing care and gratitude. It was no longer one-sided. She had begun to participate, to give, to connect. The man realized that trust had become a two-way street. And that was when he truly understood the depth of their bond. The foxwoman also began to show her playful side with him. She would dash ahead on forest paths, then pause to look back with anticipation, inviting him to follow. She would nuzzle small animals carefully, showing a gentle curiosity. She even allowed him to touch her gently on the back or head, something she had avoided for months. Each small gesture was a step further into freedom, into comfort with herself and with another being. Over time, the man noticed that she was also beginning to speak more not in words, but through sounds and expressions. She made soft, contented noises when relaxed, and small exclamations when curious or excited. He learned to recognize the meaning behind these sounds, understanding her emotions in a way deeper than words alone could convey. One morning, after a week of heavy rain, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light on the forest. The foxwoman stepped into a sunlit clearing and rolled gently in the grass, shaking off water and enjoying the warmth. She looked completely at ease, her body relaxed and her eyes bright. The man watched quietly, realizing that she had learned to enjoy life again. She had discovered joy, simple and pure. Despite all the fear and hardship she had endured, the man also introduced her to small signs of human kindness in the village, carefully chosen to avoid overwhelming her. They observed villagers tending to animals, planting gardens, and performing daily tasks. The foxwoman watched closely, learning that humans could be gentle and helpful. She did not interact directly yet, but the knowledge that not all humans were dangerous was slowly taking root by the end of spring. The foxwoman had transformed in small but profound ways. She moved confidently through the forest, explored new paths, tended the garden with care, and expressed her emotions freely. She trusted the man completely, seeking his presence without fear. She had discovered a sense of safety, companionship, and understanding that had been missing for so many years. The man reflected on their journey. Months ago, she had been trapped in a shrine, bound by charms, abandoned, and feared by everyone. Now, she was free in body, mind, and spirit. She had learned patience, care in human ways. But more importantly, she had learned to trust again. The story of fear and isolation had been replaced with one of hope, healing, and quiet joy. One evening, as they sat near the stream watching the sunset, the foxwoman rested her head on his lap for the first time. She did not nudge or demand attention. She simply stayed there, relaxed and calm. The man stroked her gently, careful not to startle her. He felt a deep sense of peace. This was more than trust, it was comfort, a silent acknowledgement that she felt safe, understood, and accepted. The forest around them was quiet, but inside that quiet something remarkable had grown. Fear no longer controlled the foxwoman. She had learned that freedom could coexist with trust. That companionship did not mean loss of self, and that the world, though sometimes harsh, could also be kind. The man knew that challenges still lay ahead. There would be days when the forest was dangerous, when villagers were unkind, or when the foxwoman's past fear would resurface. But he also knew that she had the courage, patience, and wisdom to face them. She was no longer defined by fear or isolation. She was defined by resilience, learning, and the quiet bond they shared. And so, as spring deepened and flowers blossomed, the foxwoman rested in his lap, purring softly in a sound of comfort and contentment. The man smiled quietly, understanding that their journey was not over, but that the hardest part, breaking chains and rebuilding trust, was well underway. Together, they had created a world where she could be free, happy, and safe, one gentle step at a time. Summer arrived in the mountains, and with it, a warm breeze that carried the scent of flowers, fresh grass, and the forest's deep, earthy smell. The man walked toward the shrine early in the morning, enjoying the soft light as it filtered through the trees. The foxwoman had grown more confident than ever. She ran lightly through the forest, explored hidden paths, and had even begun venturing closer to the village under the man's careful guidance. She was free, not just in body, but in spirit. When he reached the shrine, she was waiting near the stream, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. Her ears twitched at his approach, but this time with curiosity and happiness, not fear. She greeted him with a soft sound that he had learned to recognize as her way of saying hello. The man smiled. Over the past months, they had built a bond stronger than words. Based on patience, respect, and quiet understanding, today, he planned something important. It was time for her to step fully into freedom, not just in the forest, but in the world around her. He had already taught her about human routines, village ways, and the small kindnesses of daily life. He had shown her that humans could be trustworthy, and she had learned to trust. Now, it was time for her to see that she could move freely without him needing to guide every step. They walked together toward the village edge. The foxwoman paused often, sniffing the air and watching carefully. But she did not run away. She was learning that the village did not have to be a place of fear. She noticed villagers tending to gardens, children laughing, and people helping one another. She observed quietly, learning, absorbing, understanding. At first, a few villagers noticed her and stopped in surprise. They had only ever heard stories of the feared foxwoman, but now they saw her alive, calm, and curious. They froze for a moment, then stepped back, unsure of what to do. The man walked slowly beside her, letting her move naturally. She did not hide. She did not cower. She simply existed, confident in her own space and with him nearby. Some villagers whispered among themselves, and some approached cautiously. The man spoke softly, explaining who she was and how she had been misunderstood for years. He told them that she had been trapped and feared unfairly, that the stories told about her were mostly false, and that she had learned to trust again. Slowly, people began to lower their fear, watching her with curiosity instead of suspicion. The foxwoman continued exploring the village edges over the next few days, sometimes following the man and sometimes moving on her own. She began to interact with simple human objects, touching baskets, sniffing flowers, and watching children play from a safe distance. Each day, she grew more confident. She had learned that freedom was not just avoiding danger, it was understanding that she could make choices, be seen, and still remain safe. one afternoon. The man and the foxwoman sat near the stream by the shrine. The foxwoman lay close to him, her body relaxed, her eyes calm. She had begun to purr softly, a sound he had never expected but welcomed warmly. It was not just a sign of comfort. It was a signal that she felt completely safe, cared for, and accepted. She had learned that she could trust again. The man reflected on the journey they had taken together. She had been alone, chained, and feared by everyone. She had survived quietly, relying on her instincts and strength. But now, she was free. She had learned to trust humans, to navigate the forest safely, to understand village life, and to find joy in simple moments. She had become more than the story of fear the villagers told. She had become herself. Slowly, she began to explore further, beyond the forest paths he had guided her through. She ventured to clearings she had never seen, climbed small hills, and watched sunsets from higher ground. She had learned to enjoy life in a way that had been impossible before. The man watched her carefully, ready to intervene only if necessary. But allowing her to discover the world at her own pace, she also began to communicate more fully. Using gestures, soft sounds, and even expressions that the man could understand, she showed curiosity, playfulness, and affection. She brought him small gifts from the forest, carefully chosen pebbles, colorful leaves, and tiny flowers. Each gift was a token of trust, a way of showing her appreciation without needing words. The man accepted each one with gratitude, knowing that their bond had grown beyond fear, beyond survival, and into companionship. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with warm shades of orange and pink, she rested her head on his lap. Her body was relaxed, her purring soft and steady. The man stroked her gently, careful not to move too quickly. He felt a deep peace, knowing that the foxwoman, once feared and misunderstood, finally found safety, comfort, and joy. The villagers began to notice more over the following weeks. Some watched quietly from a distance, curious about this creature who had once inspired fear. Others came closer, offering small gifts of food or flowers. Slowly, walls of fear began to fall. People realized that the foxwoman was not dangerous. She was simply a being who had survived hardship and learned to trust again. The foxwoman responded to this change with quiet confidence. She did not approach everyone at once, but she allowed herself to be seen. She moved gracefully, showing her curiosity while remaining cautious. Her presence became a reminder to the villagers that fear could be replaced with understanding, that stories of terror could be replaced with stories of hope. The man continued to guide her, but less directly. He gave her space to make her own decisions, allowing her to explore the forest and village edges on her own. She had learned to navigate safely, to recognize kindness, and to understand human ways without losing her independence. Freedom was now fully hers, and she carried it with a quiet dignity. One day, she led him to a small meadow filled with wildflowers. She moved through the tall grass, stopping to sniff the flowers and watch butterflies. She looked completely at ease, her eyes bright and alert, her movements graceful and confident. The man watched quietly, smiling. She had discovered not just freedom, but joy, curiosity, and the pleasure of living fully. At night she returned to the shrine, where the man had prepared a small fire. She lay close to him, resting and purring softly. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was finally free, safe, and understood. The journey from fear to trust had been long, but it had been worth every step. Over time, the foxwoman became a quiet presence in the village's edges. She explored, she observed, she learned, and she played. She interacted with humans only when she felt safe, always choosing her own path. The villagers grew used to her presence, respecting her space and learning from her gentle example. They saw that she was not a monster, but a living being who had been misunderstood. The man realized that the foxwoman's story had changed everything. She was no longer a symbol of fear. She was a symbol of resilience, trust, and the quiet power of kindness. She had survived hardship, learned patience, and rediscovered joy, and she had chosen to trust him, allowing herself to experience freedom in the safest and most meaningful way. One morning, the man sat quietly in the clearing, watching her play near the stream. She leaped lightly over stones, sniffed at flowers, and chased small animals gently, showing no fear and no hesitation. Her ears flicked at every sound, her eyes bright with curiosity and joy. She paused and looked at him, as if to say thank you, without needing words. The man nodded, smiling. Their journey had brought them both understanding, companionship, and peace. As summer deepened, the fox woman rested in his lap, purring softly. Fully at ease in the warmth of the sun and the safety of his presence, she had discovered freedom, trust, and joy. The man knew that this was the story that mattered, not the one told in fear, but the one lived in kindness, patience, and understanding. The fox woman had been feared, trapped, and misunderstood. Now she was free. She moved through the forest and village edges with confidence. She trusted humans selectively and lived with joy in her heart. She rested near the man, not out of fear, but because she chose to, in the quiet of the forest. With the sun setting and birds singing softly, the man understood the truth of their journey. Freedom was not just escaping chains, it was learning to trust, learning to live fully and finding companionship without fear. And the fox woman, once a figure of terror in whispered stories, had found all of these things. The story ended not with a dramatic event, but with quiet peace. The fox woman rested comfortably, the man nearby, and the forest around them alive and calm. Fear had been replaced with trust. Chains had been replaced with freedom. Stories of terror had been replaced with stories of hope. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, the fox woman purred softly in his lap, completely free and completely herself.